Some of you may have seen videos or read headlines about the shocking story of Sheikh Khalil Abdul Azim. But what most people don't realize is that there's a much deeper side to this tragedy, one that reveals how passion, loyalty, and division collided in a way nobody expected. In today's video, we're not just revisiting the story, we're uncovering the hidden details, the build-up that led to that fateful day, and what it really means for America. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what your name is and where you're watching from. If you've seen other versions of this story before, stick around, because this one will leave you seeing it in a whole new light. The narrative of Sheikh Khalil Abdul Azim and Maya Beaumont is one that transcends the conventional true crime taxonomy of motive and opportunity, instead rooting itself in the profound and universal human struggle between identity and aspiration, between the selves we are given and the selves we yearn to become. The 911 call that echoed through the Detroit Emergency Dispatch Center at 3:47 a.m. on November 23, 2024, was not merely a report of a crime. It was the opening line of a meticulously crafted final chapter, a performance designed to shroud a calculated act of destruction in the chaotic guise of random urban violence. The voice of Maya Beaumont, expertly modulating between breathless terror and shattered grief, painted a visceral picture for the operator: the sound of shattering glass, the muffled threats of masked intruders, the sickening thud of a blow, and the terrifying stillness of the man she loved. This narrative, so immediately compelling and sympathetic, began to unravel the moment the first police cruiser arrived at 1247 Lakeshore Drive, its flashing lights illuminating a scene of such stark contradiction that it seemed almost a challenge to the officers' perceptions. There lay Sheikh Khalil Abdul Azim, a titan of global industry, extinguished in the brutal intimacy of his own bedroom. And there stood Maya, the very picture of the traumatized survivor, her physical wounds serving as a silent, powerful testimony to her alleged ordeal. Yet, beneath this surface, a more complex and sinister truth lay in wait, a truth that would slowly emerge to reveal a tragedy not of chance, but of choice, a chilling chronicle of how the pursuit of a curated dream can metastasize into the execution of a cold-blooded plan, demonstrating that the most intricate deceptions are ultimately fractured not by a single error, but by the relentless, cumulative weight of their own internal falsehoods against the immovable bedrock of reality. To fully apprehend the tragedy of Khalil Abdul Azim, one must venture beyond the headlines of his wealth and murder, and into the schism that defined his very soul. He was born into a world of almost mythical opulence in Dubai, the third son of Ahmed Abdul Azim, a man who had forged a global shipping empire from the hull of a single dhow through a combination of relentless will and an innate understanding of the tides of commerce. The Abdul Azim household was a microcosm of a city that had willed itself from the sands into a shimmering metropolis, a place where the boundaries between family, business, and legacy were seamlessly blurred. From a young age, Khalil was immersed in a culture where obligation was as inherent as the air he breathed. His future was not a path to be carved, but a role to be assumed. His older brothers, Rashid and Tariq, embodied this expectation, their identities merging effortlessly with their responsibilities as heirs to the dynasty. Khalil, however, possessed a different temperament. He was introspective where they were gregarious, questioning where they were accepting. His gaze was fixed not on the shifting sands of the Arabian desert, but on the soaring skylines of American cities depicted in his economics textbooks. His departure for Harvard Business School in 1993 was, in hindsight, less an academic pursuit and more a grand act of self-liberation. The campus in Cambridge became his sanctuary and his laboratory. For the first time, he was judged not on his family's name, but on the sharpness of his mind in a case study competition, the persuasiveness of his arguments in a seminar room. He thrived in the intellectual crucible, adopting the language of American capitalism and the culture of individual achievement. He developed a passion for jazz, its improvisational nature a stark contrast to the structured melodies of his heritage. He frequented art galleries, drawn to the rebellious spirit of abstract expressionism. And most dangerously, he cultivated a taste for the company of American women, who saw him not as a sheik, but as a charming, enigmatic peer. This 4-year interlude crafted a new version of Khalil, confident, westernized, and fiercely independent. It was this version that would later captivate Maya Beaumont, a version that believed it had transcended the confines of its origin. Yet, the gravitational pull of home and duty proved inescapable. His return to Dubai in 1997 was a homecoming that felt, to him, like a return to a gilded cage. The marriage to Fatima al-Rashid in 1998 was, from the outside, a masterstroke of dynastic alignment. The al-Rashid family's holdings in telecommunications complemented the Abdul Azim shipping empire, creating a formidable economic bloc. But to reduce their union to a mere business transaction would be a profound misreading. Fatima was a formidable intellectual partner, a graduate of the London School of Economics with a keen analytical mind that often saw strategic solutions Khalil himself missed. She was elegant, poised, and deeply committed to the preservation of their shared culture and the upbringing of their 3 children. Together, they built a life that was the envy of Dubai society, a perfect mosaic of tradition, prosperity, and familial devotion. Khalil's own company, Abdul Azim Global Properties, expanded this legacy, erecting iconic structures in London and New York, and finally, in the resurgent city of Detroit. Outwardly, he had achieved a sublime balance, seamlessly integrating his American-acquired business acumen with his Emirati heritage. But internally, the man who had tasted the intoxicating freedom of self-definition found the scripted nature of his existence increasingly suffocating. The persona of Sheikh Khalil Abdul Azim, the devoted husband, the doting father, the pillar of the community, became a performance, one he executed with flawless precision, but which demanded a constant, draining vigilance. It was this psychological claustrophobia that gave birth to his Detroit persona. Starting around 2018, his business trips to the American Midwest evolved in both frequency and duration. He justified them to Fatima as essential for overseeing the aggressive expansion of his $200 million Detroit portfolio, and this was a valid, defensible reason. But the deeper, more potent truth was that Detroit became his psychological sanctuary, a place where the weight of his title vanished. In the anonymity of a city known for its rugged individualism, he could silence the constant hum of expectation. He could dine without being observed, speak without his words being analyzed for subtext, and simply exist as Khalil, a successful businessman whose identity was his own to define. This self-imposed duality was the core of his tragedy. In creating an escape from his life, he inadvertently created a vacuum, a space devoid of the moral guardrails of his community, and it was into this vacuum that a woman would step, her own ambitions a mirror reflecting his deepest insecurities and unmet desires. If Khalil's story is one of a man fractured by competing identities, then Maya Renee Beaumont's is one of a woman meticulously constructing an identity from the raw materials of ambition and perceived lack. Her roots were planted not in the marble halls of Dubai, but in the resilient, working-class soil of Detroit. Her father, Darnell Beaumont, was a master electrician for Detroit Edison, a man whose world was governed by the tangible logic of circuits and the unshakable principle that a man's word was his bond. Her mother, Kamala Patel, had arrived from India with little more than a degree in accounting and a ferocious determination to build a new life, eventually finding work as a bookkeeper for a contracting firm. Their love story was a quiet testament to the city's gritty soul, a connection forged not in grand romance, but in shared respect and a common commitment to building a better future for their daughter. Maya grew up navigating the complex cultural cartography of her heritage with the innate dexterity of a native. In their modest home, the scent of her mother's turmeric and cumin mingled with the faint odor of ozone and engine grease on her father's work clothes. She learned to recite prayers in Gujarati and to rewire a faulty lamp with equal competence. This lifelong practice in code switching became her defining superpower. In high school, she was a chameleon, a star student in advanced placement classes, a tenacious player on the varsity basketball court, and a confidant to friends from wildly different social circles. At the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business, she found her métier in international real estate. Her senior thesis, a brilliant analysis of cross-cultural negotiation tactics and property investment, was more than academic exercise, it was the blueprint for her future. It caught the attention of Pinnacle Luxury Realty, who saw in her the perfect intermediary for the wealthy foreign investors who were beginning to see Detroit as a frontier of opportunity. By her early 30s, Maya was the undisputed star of the firm. She cultivated an aura of effortless sophistication and razor-sharp intellect. She learned Arabic not as a party trick, but as a weapon of business, a gesture of deep cultural respect that disarmed and impressed her powerful Middle Eastern clients. Her portfolio was a passport of global wealth. She found penthouses for Russian oligarchs, industrial complexes for German manufacturers, and secure compounds for Saudi royalty. Yet, for all her professional accolades, her personal life was a landscape of emotional scarcity. A serious, 3-year relationship with a charismatic consultant named Jerome Washington had ended in a betrayal that fundamentally reshaped her. She discovered he had been systematically siphoning money from her savings to prop up his own failing startup, a deception that left her not only financially compromised but emotionally ravaged. The experience built a fortress around her heart, instilling a deep-seated suspicion of others' motives and a ferocious determination to achieve a level of financial independence that would make her invulnerable to ever being used again. By the time she was assigned to Sheikh Khalil Abdul Azim, Maya was, in a profound sense, a brilliantly engineered vessel, polished and impressive, but hollowed out by betrayal and filled with a yearning for a life of significance and security. She had the career, the condo, the reliable car, but they felt like props in a play that had not yet reached its climax. She was successful, but she was not satiated. This chasm between her achieved reality and her aspirational self made her uniquely vulnerable to the world a man like Khalil could unveil. The first meeting at the Lakeshore Drive mansion in September 2022 was less an introduction and more a collision of two complementary voids. Maya, having exhaustively researched her client, believed she was prepared. She knew the net worth, the corporate structure, the family tree. But the man who emerged from the black Maybach defied the dossier. He carried an authority that was innate, not assumed. His handshake was firm, his gaze direct, and his English, polished by years at Harvard, was effortless, though it retained the lyrical cadence of his native Arabic. For Khalil, Maya was an immediate revelation. She was not sycophantic, nor was she visibly intimidated by his wealth. She discussed the architectural integrity of the mansion's cantilevered design with the precision of an engineer. Then pivoted seamlessly to a nuanced observation about the economic diversification efforts of the UAE, displaying a depth of knowledge that went far beyond the superficial. When she mentioned, standing in the master suite overlooking the river, that she had learned Arabic to better understand the soul of her client's culture, he was genuinely disarmed. Her comment that the house felt like a place free from complications was not a rehearsed sales pitch, it was an intuitive insight that struck the deepest chord within him. She saw past the title of Sheikh to the restless man beneath. He purchased the house that day for the full $4.2 million asking price, a transaction that secured Maya's largest commission. But the true exchange was far more significant. He had acquired a property, and she had captured his profound fascination, becoming the human embodiment of his Detroit sanctuary. What followed was a slow, deliberate, and mutually agreed upon descent into intimacy, choreographed under the guise of professional necessity. It began with requests for her assistance in furnishing the Stark mansion, in selecting art, in managing the landscape architects. Their dinners, initially framed as debriefings, stretched into long, wine-soaked conversations that traversed continents of topics: the poetry of Rumi, the economic philosophy of Adam Smith, the peculiar loneliness of being a high achiever. Khalil found in Maya a listener who comprehended the pressures of his world without being burdened by them, an escape who was also an intellectual stimulant. For Maya, the attention was a potent elixir. This was not the fumbling, needy affection of her past, this was the focused, generous, and empowering attention of a man who commanded boardrooms and destinies. The relationship turned physical within months. And with it came a new, unspoken economy. A consulting retainer of $15,000 a month materialized in her bank account. A sleek BMW i8 was delivered, the title bearing her name. Credit cards for client entertainment began to cover her personal shopping, her spa treatments, her luxury vacations. Maya constructed elaborate rationalizations for this economy. She was not a mistress, she was a highly compensated consultant and companion. She maintained her own client list, her downtown condo, a fragile fig leaf of independence. But with every lavish gift, every whispered secret on his private jet, every weekend spent playing house in the Lakeshore Drive mansion, the lines blurred beyond recognition. She was being paid to inhabit his world, and gradually, her own world began to atrophy. Friendships faded, the common ground of shared experience eroded. Family gatherings felt provincial and mundane compared to the glittering bubbles she shared with Khalil. She was living a secret life, but unlike him, she had no authentic life to which she could return. Her entire sense of self was becoming dangerously entangled with, and dependent upon, the reflection she saw in his admiring eyes. The meticulously constructed fantasy began to fracture in early November 2024, with a series of events that acted like tremors before a cataclysmic earthquake. Khalil had returned to Dubai to celebrate his 26th wedding anniversary with Fatima, a milestone he mentioned to Maya with a casualness that was either profoundly insensitive or deliberately cruel. The number, 26 years, landed not as a fact, but as a verdict, rendering his primary life vast, enduring, and legitimate, while hers felt ephemeral and insignificant. The fatal catalyst, however, occurred on November 8th, during one of Khalil's visits to Detroit. An urgent contract dispute with a partner in Abu Dhabi required his immediate attention, keeping him on a marathon of video calls late into the night. Exhausted and frustrated, he finally stumbled to bed in the early hours, committing a catastrophic oversight. He left his laptop open in the study, logged into his personal email account. The next morning, driven by a corrosive mix of insecurity and a desperate need to know the truth, Maya sat before the glowing screen and opened a portal to the reality she had been willfully ignoring. What she discovered was a systematic dismantling of every narrative he had ever sold her. The emails to Fatima were not the sterile, functional communications of a man in a marriage of convenience. They were vibrant, filled with shared jokes about their children, collaborative strategizing on business challenges, and a palpable, deep-seated affection. Fatima was not a background figure, she was his CEO, his strategic partner, his emotional anchor. This personal betrayal was profound. But the second discovery was existential. In carefully organized but hidden folders, she uncovered the evidence of Isabel Loran, a 29-year-old art dealer in London, and Sophia Chin, a 31-year-old marketing executive, in New York. The pattern was chillingly corporate: identify a key city for business, find an intelligent, attractive, an ambitious local woman, establish a relationship, provide financial support and luxury accommodations in exchange for exclusivity and absolute discretion. She was not a singular, cherished exception, she was one in a portfolio, a branch office in his empire of secrets. The final, pragmatic horror that sealed Khalil's fate was a file labeled U.S. Portfolio Restructuring Q1 2025. It was a plan to systematically divest from his American holdings and, in the process, terminate all his local consulting agreements. The retainer, the car, the credit cards, the access to the mansion, it was all scheduled for termination. She had invested 2 years of her life, her emotional energy, and her professional loyalty, and he was planning to liquidate her position with the emotionless efficiency of an accountant writing off a bad debt. This was the crucible in which the compassionate, ambitious woman was annihilated and the calculating murderer was forged. Maya's initial shock and grief did not erupt into a hot, impulsive rage, but rather crystallized into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. She spent the 2 weeks while Khalil was in Dubai, not in mourning, but in a methodical campaign of weaponization, using the digital access he had so carelessly granted her. She became a ghost in his machine, mapping the global architecture of his financial empire, discovering numbered accounts in the Cayman Islands, property deeds in a Swiss vault, and investment portfolios managed by private banks in London. She understood, with chilling clarity, the legal vulnerability he had created. By holding his American assets in a separate corporate structure, deliberately isolated from UAE inheritance laws, he had created a scenario where, should he die on American soil, these assets would be frozen in a protracted probate process, creating a window of opportunity for a persuasive claimant. Her internet research shifted dramatically in tone and intent. The history on her personal devices became a digital roadmap of premeditation. Average police response time, luxury neighborhood Detroit, forensic analysis of staged crime scenes, blood spatter patterns from blunt force trauma, inheritance rights for unmarried partners in Michigan. How long does DNA evidence last? The plan that coalesced from this research was monstrous in its clarity and ambition. She would kill him, stage a botched home invasion, perform the role of the sole, traumatized survivor, and then, in the ensuing legal chaos, use forged documents to assert her rights as his common-law wife and claim a significant portion of his American fortune. She used her intimate knowledge of his habits, his routines, and the mansion's security system, knowledge he had gifted her in a covenant of trust, to plot the precise details of his murder. She then lured him back to Detroit with a masterfully ambiguous message about needing to discuss their future. A piece of psychological bait he swallowed whole, believing she was finally ready to negotiate the graceful end of their arrangement. The final act unfolded over the Thanksgiving weekend of 2024, a holiday dedicated to gratitude becoming the backdrop for ultimate betrayal. Their dinner was a macabre pantomime of domesticity. Khalil, believing he was managing the dissolution of their affair with generosity and wisdom, was in a magnanimous mood, speaking philosophically about gratitude, balance, and the different chapters of a life. Maya played her part to perfection, her smiles and nods a masterclass in deception, all the while knowing that the elegant Tiffany crystal paperweight on his desk, a beautiful, heavy object he had gifted her as a token of his affection, was the chosen instrument of his destruction. In the profound silence of the early hours of November 23rd, after he had fallen into a deep, trusting sleep, she executed her plan with the cold precision of a surgeon. She disabled the exterior security cameras by tripping a specific circuit, created superficial scratches around the back door's lock to simulate a clumsy break-in attempt, and used professional makeup and a precise knife to craft a constellation of convincing defensive wounds on her own arms, neck, and palms. Then, standing over the man who had offered her a world and then decided to revoke the offer, she brought the paperweight down upon his temple with a force that was both brutal and final. The 911 call that followed was a piece of performance art, a symphony of shattered sentences, hysterical sobs, and calculated pauses that immediately and powerfully cast her in the role of the innocent, devastated victim. For several crucial hours, the performance was impeccable, successfully directing the narrative toward a tragic random crime. But the investigation, spearheaded by Detective Zion Parker of the Detroit Homicide Unit, began to act like a slow-acting acid applied to a painted facade. Parker, a veteran with 15 years of navigating the city's most brutal crimes, possessed a deep-seated intuition for when a story was too clean, too symmetrical. The forced entry at the back door showed scratches that were theatrically placed but lacked the deep, wrenching damage of a genuine break-in. The crime scene was a study in contradiction. Cheap electronics were taken, but priceless watches and stacks of cash were left in plain sight. The blood spatter analysis conducted by forensic experts told a silent, damning story of an attack on a stationary, supine figure, not a standing confrontation. The mansion's sophisticated security system had experienced a highly specific, localized malfunction just before the incident, one that the system's engineers described as anomalous and highly unlikely to occur randomly. As Parker's team meticulously peeled back the layers, Maya's carefully constructed victim narrative began to crumble. They uncovered her internet search history, a chronological ledger of premeditation. They found Khalil's laptop, which she had claimed was stolen during the robbery, carefully hidden in the back of her own apartment's closet. A search warrant executed on her home revealed the forged common-law marriage certificate and the backdated will naming her as the primary beneficiary of his American estate. Her financial records painted a stark picture of a life sustained almost entirely by Khalil's beneficence, a financial lifeline that was, according to the documents she herself had discovered, imminently to be severed. Confronted in the interrogation room with this avalanche of irrefutable evidence, Maya's mask of traumatized grief finally shattered. What emerged was not a tearful confession of remorse, but a cold, articulate, and frighteningly rational justification. She spoke of betrayal, of wasted years, of a debt owed. She expressed no sorrow for ending a human life, only a furious, entitled resentment that her meticulously laid plans for financial security had been discovered and thwarted. The trial that followed was a media sensation, a public dissection of the double life and the calculated murder that ended it. The prosecution, led by a formidable ADA, framed Maya as a ruthlessly ambitious social climber who viewed murder as a legitimate business strategy. The defense attempted to portray her as a victim herself, a woman psychologically manipulated and then callously discarded by a powerful man. The jury, however, saw through the artifice to the cold, calculating heart of the crime. The guilty verdict for first-degree murder was returned after a surprisingly brief deliberation, and the sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole brought a final, judicial conclusion to the case. In the final analysis, the story of Khalil Abdul Azim and Maya Beaumont is a tragic symphony of self-destruction. A tale of two individuals who, in seeking to transcend the boundaries of their assigned lives, ultimately orchestrated their own ruin. Khalil, in his quest for freedom from the constraints of his identity, constructed a secret world that became a funhouse mirror, reflecting back a distorted image that he mistook for liberation, only to be consumed by the very illusion he created. Maya, in her desperate ascent from a world of tangible effort to one of curated luxury, sacrificed her morality, her humanity, and her ultimate freedom on the altar of materialism, believing she was claiming a destiny she deserved, only to annihilate the very future she sought to secure. The mansion on Lakeshore Drive stands now not as a monument to their forbidden romance, but as a haunting mausoleum to the perils of inauthenticity. It serves as a stark and enduring reminder that the identities we painstakingly curate and the gilded cages we so willingly inhabit can become the very instruments of our demise, proving that the most inescapable prisons are not constructed of steel and concrete, but of ambition, deception, and a fundamental refusal to reconcile the person we are with the person we aspire to be. This story leaves us questioning everything we thought we knew about love, loyalty, and the breaking point of the human spirit. What would you do if faced with such a betrayal? Could you walk away, or would you seek justice in your own way? Share your thoughts below. What's your name, and where are you watching from? The Becky Studio, we know you're out there. Tell us what you think of this story. If this case has gripped you as much as it has us, hit that like button, subscribe, and join the killer next door for more heart-pounding narratives. Our next case dives into family secrets and hidden loyalties. Stay tuned. Stay safe, reflect on your relationships, and never underestimate the power of a broken heart.